All right. Recording in progress. So we'll get started. Thank you for being here. Birgit, of course, as you know, is a musician. Everyone knows her as a pianist and a piano teacher in the South Orange, Maplewood neighborhoods. She's also very active in New York City and has a community of piano teachers there. And we had a conversation amongst the board about how much we felt like Birgit had to teach us about the way that she thinks about music and the way that she thinks about the discipline of music, the experience of music. And when we approached Birgit about, oh, we got Sylvia, let me just hit admit. When we approached Birgit about having a conversation about this, Birgit said, I would much prefer to have a conversation than an interview. And so I said that I would volunteer to do that as a fellow musician. So as many of you know, I'm also have a life in music and mostly in conducting. I conduct a chorus. And so Birgit and I sat down and had a very nice preparatory conversation at the Baird in the Game Cafe. If you haven't been there, it's very nice, very good coffee, and talked about life and music. And so we thought we would touch on some of the topics there in this room. We touched on everything from philosophy to what it means to learn, to what it means to be present and truly, be listening. So with that, Birgit, is there anything you wanted to say in terms of an intro or?
Yeah, I mean, what
Sit closer to you.
started, kind of what started the topic, we said mistakes in music and in life. I was actually practicing, which takes up a considerable amount of my time. And it's caught my attention over the years repeatedly how what you do when you practice is so different from a lot of these devices that surround us, that function at the push of a button. And when they don't come on, they're broken, and that's that. And of course, it's all very convenient, and I think we've gotten very used to it. But I also am concerned that it makes us lose the perspective and the idea of how growth and learning really works as a sequence of exploration, of doing the same thing again and again, and that way, as we repeat, as we observe what we do, we gradually achieve more knowledge, more skills, a kind of proficiency. And I often think of people who don't have that experience. And I mean, we don't only have it at the piano, we have it in pretty much everything, when we cook, when we clean the house, and or when we just, thinking of a lot of things, ultimately everything is process. And even if you throw out $50 billion, that won't give you the industrial plant the next day. There are lots and lots and lots of other things that have to be explored and work together until, the desired result is there. And yeah, I'm concerned that if you're not aware of that experience in your everyday life, what does that do to people?
That's an interesting question, Birgit. And we were talking about how not everyone, I would guess that everyone in here has studied some musical instrument at some point, even if it was just the recorder in third grade. But not everyone has the experience of the discipline of like really learning an instrument to a high level. And yet everyone probably has the experience of learning something to a high level. And so we were thinking about the way that music and instrument, especially learning to play an instrument, is in some ways a special case for something that we've all have experience in. But it's interesting what you said at the beginning of that, of what you just said around, the phrase that came to mind was frustration. That there's something about doing something and not quite getting it as good as you'd like, and doing it again and again and again. And I started to think of the phrase creative frustration, like there's something generative about the experience of trying that doesn't come with the push of a button. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, what is that? How does that figure into your experience of learning music? That sense of like, it isn't there and I need to push forward and figure out how to make it better.
It involves bringing things into focus. It involves different parts of our mind, different parts of our attention. It involves, with regard to listening, it involves getting an idea in your head of how the piece sounds, or how you feel the piece would ideally sound. And then at the piano, finding the right motion to produce that sound. It's, it's not just hitting the right pitch at the right time. I think that for many people have that idea. If you hit all the right notes, the piece comes out. That's in a way, that's another, I think that's another outcome of this sort of automatic thinking, input, output, that's what you get if you do it right. And it's almost like you explore it, and as you explore, you discover more and more and more. I like to, with music, I like to compare the piece to a journey, to a trip that you're taking. You go through that piece again and again and again. You travel that road many times until you have something that you feel that comes close to what you think it means. And I mean, I think there's something very there's something very healthy in that training of the different parts of the mind, the just cool observing. You hear the music and you think, oh, it's so emotional and it's so beautiful, but it takes a lot of observation and analysis to find out how it's done. And really, in the end, I would say if you play, the ideal is to synchronize your mind stream with the sound that that comes out. It's not, and that to the listener and also to yourself comes across as the emotion. But at that moment when you play, that's the interesting thing. You have to keep the balance, because you're going to go over the edge if you play the actual drama of the Appassionata Sonata. You're not going to make it to the end. You have you have to keep that balance, and that balance is the sound. It's the actual sound, which I have to say, if I compare it to experience, how I experienced music, let's say as a teenager, where you go, oh, the big emotions, and it's so exciting. And when I look back today, I actually have to say, I have to admit, I wasn't really hearing the music. I was just, kind of indulging in the emotion and daydreaming. But the experience of that pure sound is just a whole other thing. And I think it goes so much deeper than this emotional experience. The emotional experience is important too, but I would say now, today, with what I know today, it's only opening the door.
That's fascinating. I wonder how many of us, I mean, classical music can be a challenge for some people, right? Because it's long and there's not often words, or if there are words, they're not in a language we speak. So it's sometimes a challenge. I think the length in particular, but also the lack of familiarity. And actually a third element that makes classical music difficult is just the word classical music tends to encompass such an enormous variety of music, music all the way back, that's hundreds of years old, music that was composed yesterday for an orchestra, the tone poems versus like a Mozart sonata. I mean, all that we put under the rubric of classical music. And it can be kind of hard for some people to find an entry into that kind of music. And I think sometimes they put a burden on themselves of saying like, oh, I need to tap into that emotion. I need to kind of like figure out what the emotion is around this music. And that's what'll make me feel like I'm really appreciating it. But I wonder, what you just described almost sounds like imposing emotion, or the word you used was like indulging in the emotion, can sometimes take you out of the experience of simply being present, of simply listening, of simply allowing the sound to be present with you in the moment. Is that some of what you're getting at there around that? Can you talk a little bit more about what is the process of, so imagining that you've got an emotional, journey or emotional, touch point within yourself that you're touching, but what is that journey like to let that go and then just be present with the sound?
Well, I mean, my personal journey was simply that I was trying to play the piano as best as I could, and I could never get really what I heard in my mind. And then, or I wasn't so aware of these things. So the time I'm talking about now is maybe college. And I mean, I played well enough to get all my credits and everything, but I personally knew that, that there was something that I just couldn't get out. And what usually happened when I performed was that I was, standing next to myself, watching myself play and make mistakes, because I never had that experience of being in the music. And it would happen sometimes, but it was more of a chance result. And then meeting my current teacher, Seymour Bernstein, he was the one who made that, he calls it making a physical connection to musical feeling. Because when you think of the piano, ultimately it's all motions. It's the dance of the hands on the keyboard. And there are many ways to produce a sound. When you make a sound on the piano, basically what you do by lowering the key, you throw a hammer against a string, and that makes the sound. And loud and soft is determined, and quality of the sound, by the speed with which the hammer hits the string. It's speed, it's not pressure. And of course, you have to learn to regulate that. So there are certain gestures that correspond to certain gestures in music. And under Seymour's guidance, I learned that over time. And that made performance a lot more predictable, because I knew what I was doing. I didn't know, I was just sort of playing before, kind of running on the emotion, and something got through. And the general comment usually was, it's very musical, it's very expressive, but technique, maybe not so much. And I also have to say that I resented all the technical stuff. I was afraid that I was going to destroy the emotion by looking at things from a more balanced point of view, or just observation. What am I doing, upstroke or downstroke? And I remember when I started to study with Seymour, I just asking, how do you know that chord requires that motion and not that motion? And sometimes he would say, oh, when I think about it, maybe you could do it the other way around. So So a lot of the time, there's definitely more than one way, but you have to figure out for yourself what there is. And I mean, what I find fascinating with a choir and with Tom is, I mean, I have the instrument. I can show the students what happens and, you know, can guide them through the motion. But I feel if you're a conductor, a choir, or an orchestra, you really have to get from one mind to the other. You have to find a way to communicate. First of all, you have to hold it together, and you have to communicate what's in your mind. Maybe you can say something.
Well, you know,
about that.
it's a really interesting, I think many times we think about learning as a mental activity, right? We think about it as something that happens in our brains. We learn something and our brains learn it. And when we're trying to figure something out, we think of it as an intellectual exercise. We're going to try and understand something, and it's about our, you know, intellect, and it's analytical. And what I think you just described around the physicalness of learning the piano, that actually is very similar to the conductor. You know, as a conductor, I'm making gestures. And I think about a lot of things in gestures, honestly, even intellectual, you know, things that I feel like I'm understanding intellectually. I think about them in gestures because I think my 2 cents is that we learn things through our bodies. We learn things in our bodies and through our bodies. And when I'm conducting, I'm as much trying to get in touch with how things feel to me physically, because you know, and I have some very obvious, I think, examples that I don't know if they prove my point, but at least illustrate it. That when you think about the most exciting moments in music, like a piece that you love, that you're always looking forward to that amazing like crescendo, and then there's a big moment, and then there's a release, and then, you know, whatever it is, the piano plays, the singer sings, the orchestra cascades down. Those, what I just described of a crescendo up, and then a moment, and then a release, those are all physical, you know? Those are all gestural. And I think they're good. I'm sorry. All right. They're gestural ideas and they're physical ideas, and we understand them physically, which is what I think is so fascinating. The mind-body connection that we all seek to experience, I think, through things like meditation, you know, those things also happen in the context of music. And I think they also happen in the context of lots of other things we do in our lives. I would stretch to say parenting, you know, a conversation with a good friend over coffee. You know, there's things that you, when your friend is in trouble and is having, is working through something difficult, and you're sensing in that moment, what's the right next thing to say? It's not necessarily to say like, everything's gonna be fine. You know, that's not necessarily the right next thing to say. When you're sensing what that is to do, there's a gesture to that entire exchange with that other human being that is, I think, physical. And I think that's one of the things that music also taps into, is that physical gestural language. But what's awesome about piano and conducting is that we actually get to do it with our hands. You know, like your fingers are moving, like and sound itself is physical, right? It hits your eardrum. It's like moving particles of air that are banging against your eardrum. And so even that is physical. I mean, I just find it fascinating. That's like an externalization of ideas into your fingers and your feet and your arms and your back and your body.
Do you find that when you talk about conducting, that everybody spontaneously understands the gestures, or is there a learning process? Are there people who are not getting it?
That's a good, you mean in terms of like choir members?
Yeah.
My, one of the things I've noticed now I've been conducting my choir for 25 years. We just finished our season. Yeah, no, we just did our final concert. And one of the things I feel like I have learned is that I used to, you know, when you're younger and you hear about music being like a universal language, you know, I feel like, okay, so all humans respond to sound, and you know, that's for sure. But whether or not oh, even people in far-flung parts of the world will listen to a Mozart sonata and understand. I don't think that's true. I think we learn musical languages as part of our cultural, like music as a basic, communication platform. Sure, like every person, every probably culture in the world uses music, but in some form, but uses it for various different things, right? We use music for a million different reasons. But the specific like ways that we make music together, I think are learned. And I think that my gestural language as a conductor is something that we learn together. Like when someone joins my choir, they watch me, they listen to how other people respond to what I do. We did that little exercise about a month ago when I was doing a platform about breathing, and I asked you all those who were here to like stand and breathe and make a sound, and some of you were brave enough to like sing a note. That gesture that I use to indicate breathing and then singing is one that everyone in my choir has learned. Now it's common, like, conductors in Western, world use similar gestures. So nobody's like, I'm not like, now breathe and then say, I don't do something ridiculous, but I do something that communicates to them. But I think the nuance of my gesture, of what I mean and what to do when, is learned by my choir over the rehearsal period. Does that answer the question?
Mm. I was just thinking, when you talked about the response to music, I guess I agree with you. I also think it's very cultural. But usually when it's intense, even when it's from a different culture, you may not understand the context, but there is a reaction.
Yeah.
If you're open to sound. And I just in January, I did a presentation for a group of people about hearing and about hearing, touch, and vision in playing the piano. And I read this book or several books where it says the first sense to develop in the embryo is the sense of hearing, the sense of sound. And there was the woman who wrote the book. She said that she's a pianist, and she wrote that her son reacted as a young baby to the pieces she had been practicing while she was pregnant. I thought that was fascinating. And I think there's something about sound, you can't close your ears.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, the way you perceive it is different, and it can be more or less trained, or you may be distracted because you're involved with another sense and you don't hear what's going on. But actually, that was a fascinating experience in taking up mindfulness meditation and just learning to consciously engage with your different senses. So, also when I'm playing, to know, okay, am I listening? Am I mostly looking at the score? Am I focused on the motion? To the point where when I see a score, even when that I'm just starting to practice, I have a much better idea, even if I can't play it yet, of the motions I have to make.
Mm-hmm. That's great.
That I still have to practice it, but it really focuses the learning process.
Actually, let's touch on, because I want to be true to our title that's out on the
Yes.
on the big board out in the street. I love the way you think about wrong notes. Birgit had I thought a lot of interesting sort of like pathways to go down of what it means to make a mistake and the experience of making a mistake. Can you talk a little bit about like your thoughts about how, experience versus analysis and the sense of wrongness of a wrong note?
Well, I mean, I guess it depends on, when I think of it now, mistakes are different in different contexts. Mistakes, defined as something that was not intended. In, I think, practicing, is experimentation, where where mistakes are to be invited. Because that's also something, you know, if you're too narrow in your focus, sometimes you have to be, but it actually makes things harder. You have to keep a certain openness to things happening. And sometimes something that goes wrong leads to an insight. A lot of the time, things that don't go, and I think that's general, not just in music, things that don't go as planned often teach you more than if everything if everything goes smoothly. So let's say I have this image in my mind. Image is, it's visual. There's just no other word for the acoustic process of what the piece feels like, and you know, approximately, it's always a range. It will be different every day, but you know, general idea of how it sounds like. So in practice, you'll be experimenting and striving to develop it to sort of meet that ideal, always thought of as a range. In performance, the most important thing is to keep going, to keep the momentum. I think it's so interesting. I sometimes do judging for the Piano Teachers Guild. So that's for piano students who audition, and they give you this rating sheet, and it has a number of categories. It has one category, maturity of memory. That means, can you go on when you have memories? And you know, I always compliment people for continuing over a memory strip or a wrong note. And now the thing is when training for it, you have to approach it from both ends. You have to practice actually breaking down and finding your way back in. And I mean, at a certain point, it sort of goes hand in hand with practicing, because piano music and any, you know, more sophisticated music or longer music, what you do, you take the thing apart and put it back together, and you take it apart and you put it back together, and that way you develop your starting points. You don't always start at the beginning, you know, you start here and you start there, and then after a while you can do it. And if you want to focus more on that, you can, you know, number your starting points and make flashcards and practice starting there, which is a grueling kind of practice, especially shortly before a performance, because there, what you're training for is the opposite, you know, keeping going. But then again, you also have to, so let's say in practicing, a friend of mine does that with her students, just the no mistake method. You know, you have to play that section. If you make up, the moment you make a mistake, you have to start over. And then on the other hand, you have to practice putting everything away that you went through in the exploration process, all your thinking and analysis and watching, and just be in the music and go through no matter what happens. So, you know, it's really these two ends. And then if you're, you know, at this point, I wouldn't just say if you're lucky. I would say if you're well prepared, you have a good chance that it's going to work. And, you know, life happens. Right. Yes.
That's interesting, because what it seems to me, like what you made me think about was was fragility, you know, or brittleness, you know, when you only can play the piece if everything goes right. And then if everything goes right, you're going to get to the end. That's the only way you're going to be successful. Then it is kind of brittle. Right? As soon as one little bump happens in the road, then it's going to stop. And, you know, we've seen that before. We've had experience before, maybe, where you get to that and you're like, you know what? I'm done. Piece is over and I'm done. Whereas what you're talking about is like, I love that idea of practicing to be able to keep going no matter what. You know, that almost anti-fragility, that sense of like, I will be resilient And no matter what, I'm going to keep going. And I'm going to prepare for that. Because what you're doing is you're practicing for excellence. You're preparing for excellence. That no mistake rule, you're preparing for something that's that height of as best we possibly can, with a recognition that life happens and that sometimes things are not going to work out the way they are. So we also must be resilient. We have to have high expectations of ourselves and prepare as best we can. But even what you said is the preparation does not guarantee success. It just greatly increases your chances of it. That's like a probabilistic kind of like way of thinking about the future. I'm trying to create a future where it's more likely things are going to go well, but I'm not going to be able to control the future and make it guaranteed that everything's going to work out the way I want.
Yeah, you know, with that's the interesting thing. In order to be able to keep going with the wrong note, you have to know the piece inside out. You can't do that with a just superficial a way of knowledge. And I had an interesting experience at a lesson this week. I had a student who really played the perfect wrong note. There's a book by that title also, but it was really amazing. Young student played his piece, you know, kind of evening shadows, kind of dreamy piece. Comes to the last note, misses the last note, ends with a dissonance, finishes his piece in total praise, exactly as he learned. Just sat there, and then, you know, we have a certain sort of ritual of how you finish a slow piece. You let the keys come up slowly. You let the pedal come up slowly, and then you know, gracefully put your hands in your lap. He did all of that. Anyone who saw it, you know, would have thought, that was great. That was great. By the way, missing last notes is pretty common because you mentally already finished before you're done. You know, that moment where you think, I made it. Yeah.
I wonder if there's a compilation on YouTube of missed last notes. That would be one of the most painful things to watch. It reminds me, I shared with Birgit, I read a book by Benjamin Zander, who's the conductor of a youth orchestra in Boston, a really remarkable man who co-wrote, he and his wife is a psychologist, and the two of them wrote a book together. And one of his pieces of advice, he teaches at Boston Conservatory, I think, one of the big conservatories in Boston. And one of his pieces of advice to students is when they, especially during practicing, when they encounter a mistake, to think, how fascinating. And his, it was very funny because how many of us have made a mistake? And I see it all the time. I see it in my choir. I see it in my children. You make a mistake and you make that face. It's almost like you're making a face for the audience. Like, I am sorry. I've ruined your day. I made a mistake. I see it in my choir when they come in early and they get this face like, oh, I'm so sorry. And I always have to tell the choir, please try not to do that, because 99% of the time, no one has noticed. And when you make that face now, 100% of the people are like, what is that bass passing a stone? Like what happened to that person? So anyway, the idea though of like Benjamin Zander actually recommends that not only, so there's a video of him working with a young cellist.
That was great.
The cellist hits a wrong note. He's playing a Bach cello suite, hits a wrong note, and he makes a little face like, oh, sorry. Keeps going. And Zander says to him, no, like not only do you say, how fascinating? He said, stand up and throw up your arms. Like, how fascinating. Like, I have now an opportunity to explore something new and maybe learn something different. Like we were saying earlier, it's an opening to a new opportunity. So you might as well embrace it. Zander recommends going, you know, all the way over the edge into total embrace, you know, love oneself and love one's error and throw up one's arms with happiness. How fascinating. Yeah, he's very funny. His book has a lot of exclamation points in it. Well, we've been talking for about half an hour, Birgit. I don't know what you think is a good you know, area to wrap up. Is there a good you know, topic that we can finish with that you'd like to share or think about?
You know, I thought, well, in music and in life, it's really the slogan, the idea is no matter what happens, keep going, right? keep putting one foot in front of the other. And, you know, and try again.
Yeah, that sounds like a good motto.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for agreeing to do
Thank
this.
you.
David. We'll take maybe, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, do we do collection, take questions?
Oh, you know what? Birgit had offered before we take questions to play us something on the piano. And maybe Andy, if you want to pass a bag around. Yeah, we were thinking now during the collection, it'd be almost like a service that's got exactly. It'll for those who go to church, their past or present. I'm going to change the sound so that we can all hear Birgit's playing. So give me. Oh, I got it up here. Okay. I think I've turned it so that you'll be able to hear all of the notes that Birgit plays.
Got the last note.
She did. She did. Were you worried? Were you worried the last note was going to be?
It hurt me at the end.
Did you announce the piece?
Oh, it's the aria from the Goldberg Variations.
What?
The aria from the Goldberg Variations, the theme.
The aria.
That's what I thought.
Elaine, we're going to run out of power here in a minute if we don't have a plug. Do you? We're not plugged in. Okay.
No?
Nope.
Oh, my God.
We have 29. Oh, we're fine. We're fine. It just went a little dark, so I was worried, but we have an hour.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
Okay. All right. So any questions or I think for the folks at home, if anyone wants to, if you want to ask a question, you can stay where you are and I'll just repeat it. If you want to say anything,
Announcements first?
say it again.
Announcements and then.
Sure. Okay. So announcements?
Yeah.
All right.
Anybody with the events they want to announce? Folk Friday,
Well, Friday, June
Eighth.
13th, I think.
no,
Second Friday in June.
oh, yeah.
Second Friday in June, Folk Friday.
I believe it's the 13th.
Bring your ukuleles and your guitars.
Diana?
June 14, we should all join the resistance to save our democracy. It's no King's Day. It's the same day as the multi-million-dollar military march that we are protesting. Because while they're marching with the soldiers, they're cutting veterans' benefits, We must all find something to do. Go to indivisible.org and connect with people in your area. Join the resistance, June 14, Saturday.
You all heard June 14th, indivisible.org has more information about No King's Day and the protests associated with that day. Indivisible.org. Thanks, Daniela.
Bastille Day too, isn't it?
And well, it's Bastille Day, so. Elaine, did you have?
Okay. Hi, just next Sunday, sorry, our second last Sunday, we're hoping to have the teenagers. Zia is trying to confirm that the high schoolers are going to come to us for a last discussion with us about their next chapter. They've come to us a few times and they apparently love being with us. So we're hoping for one more session with the teenagers on the youth view of the world. And our final Sunday, the 15th, Father's Day, we have Errol de los Santos, who is a new leader in training with the UU. He's just graduated with his second MA, and he's coming to talk about the ethics of healthcare. So we're ending on a very young note as well, but with a young leader in our movement. I want a really great turnout. Thanks, everybody. And hopefully, when we finish the session, Terry will fill us in some more on amazing action at the Delaney Center, if you have time. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, am I cleared for questions? If there, like I said, if there's questions, you can stay where you are. If it's anything longer than that, then for the folks that online, we should make that comment from up here. So, Sue?
I really love this. Really interesting. I have never had a skill, an art form that required the kind of discipline that music does. And that's a personal thing. But what I wanted to ask was, the art form I do perform is writing, and you all are working with someone else's work, which seems to me very generous and better than somebody who's depending on themselves. But I wanted some response to the fact that you have the responsibility of dealing with what, Ludwig van Beethoven put down on paper, or his ideas. Just think about the difference between the kind of creativity where it's all, moi, 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 versus performing someone else's work.
Yeah. So the question from Sue is around the engagement of an artist who is performing the work written by someone else versus someone more like a poet or a writer who might be writing from their own. This is really perfect. Do you want to respond?
Yeah, I think for me that is,
That's okay.
internet. For me, that's part of the fascination, that connection of minds over the centuries and over distance. And it's not even because many of the classical composers are considered were exceptional people. There is something I feel so basically human about it. And I even personally think that, whatever those people wrote, it tapped into something even beyond who they were. Because if not, I don't think we'd respond to it. They tapped into something, greater than they were, and that's why it resonates with us, even though it was written such a long time ago. And I had a student once who was playing a little piece from beginner book, and it said anonymous composer, 16th century. And she said, wow, imagine, somebody sat there in the 16th century and wrote that little piece. And here I am, in Concord, New Hampshire, and playing that today. Or I remember, in the context how I went to play at my friend Carrie's wedding in Fairbanks, Alaska. And, I played some Bach, and I thought, and it was in this little log church, and the windows were stained glass windows with scenes from the Inuit who live there, you know, fish and in the woods and I just thought, you know, I bet Bach would never have dreamt that, you know, his music would be played in such a context. And I'm personally fascinated by those connections. But and that's also why, you know, I don't want to make this big difference between creative and recreative. I think personally, you know, being creative means space to see a bridge where other people see a gap, and it refers to all areas of life. It's not restricted to production, or you know, or you could writing or composing. It's a kind of production. Interestingly, a lot of people, and I mean, I do some writing. I am struggling again, Sue. I haven't totally forgotten your course. And I took a writing class with Sue 2 years ago. Yeah, a lot of people have told me that when they are, who write a lot more than I do, when they are what they call in the flow, it's almost like something else is writing you, you know, which I would say, which may be similar to the experience that you have when you play somebody else's music. I don't know, how do you experience that?
I'd rather not answer at this
Okay.
point. I mean, I could say a million things, but I'm fascinated by what you're saying. I was struck though by the thought that I have always self-disciplined. This is part of what I was thinking about. You know, anybody who has studied music has really had to go through a discipline that I never went through. You know, I made it up. I made up most of it on my own, which is kind of terrific, but it's also a lack. So that was part of where I was going with it, but you needn't respond. It's very, what you've said is extremely
But you know what, actually, for me, with the writing, I mean, it's writing and editing, right? You don't just write. And what helped me with the writing, I was always looking for, you know, for a way of writing that would be similar to practicing, which means you do things over and over and over. And for me, the hardest step in writing is that first step, to spit it out and have it on the paper and know how raw it is. And you know, this is not what's going to be there in the end. So I guess there is some similarity there. It happens on a different kind of in a different department, but I think the process is probably similar. And I mean, you had a lot of really very helpful steps in your course that you know, you recommend people go through, and that I found was very similar to practice steps that you go through at the, you know, in learning a piece.
Andy?
Well, there are about 1 million, I'll just, don't put the camera on me, please. Just so you can hear my voice. Thank you very much. It was both very, very interesting, and there are a lot of questions or things I could say.
Here you go. Now you're on. Janine needs to hear you.
One was,
Janine needs to hear you.
oh, okay. One was the one about learning the piece backwards and forwards and inside out, because that was very interesting and instructive, and it brought to mind your concert here with students a few months ago, where one young woman was playing well, and then she stopped, and she tried to restart, but she couldn't. And I asked you about it afterwards, and she was playing very well.
Right.
But you said that she wasn't able to switch from remembering what she was playing to seeing it again on the page, because she had to look at the page, and she couldn't do that. So you have to kind of practice it
Right.
10 ways from Sunday. And the other part of that is there are things about practicing that I don't understand, not about music so much, because I did practice, but not very much back when I played the clarinet. But things, when you look at a gymnast on the horse, or any of those terrible things, and how do you learn how to do that? Now, I think some of it, they may be in harnesses and learning, but it looks like it's so difficult to learn those physical activities, because if you land wrong, you're dead. So, there are other things I could say.
Thanks, Andy.
To say that I've also noticed that in the Olympics or wherever there was, the guys who got up when they fell, they were the winners. They were the people who were gonna make it to the end, sometimes,
Yeah.
really. And you really do learn so much from mistakes. Look at scientific invention, that's all a lot of mistakes made,
Right,
you know, right?
right.
So they learn. It's very important not to be disappointed or mean to yourself. Say, that's a mistake, I can learn from it. I can go there and go on, you know.
So Jill is saying that, the experience of experimentation and scientific advancement is about learning and how important the mistakes are. And it's interesting, that's exactly what Birgit had said earlier about the process of exploring the process of practicing is really the process of exploring. And it feels almost akin to that sense.
And also, I think that creativity is play. It
Cool.
really is play. You have to play.
Yeah.
If you don't play, you're just too rigid, just too.
Jill's also mentioning the connection between creativity and play. Yeah, go ahead, Lane.
I'm thinking about you performing these works by people who've been gone a long time, that your teacher also composes, doesn't he? Seymour composes. Have you ever played one of his pieces for him?
So the question
Yes,
from
I-
Elaine is, has Birgit ever played one of Seymour's pieces for Seymour?
Yes, I have. I've played the second book of the Birds, and I played that at his 90th or something birthday concert that we had from the Leschetitsky Association. And he, playing these pieces for him or working on them with him wasn't really that much different than, playing or working on other pieces. If anything, I would say he was more generous in terms of, what he would think appropriate or not. What I have to say about Seymour's music, I find it incredibly hard to learn. I find it incredibly hard to learn because I play a lot of, it's very, I almost want, it sounds funny, sound oriented. And I play a lot of Bach, a lot of the Baroque classical music. A lot of that is pattern music. I don't think I've ever found a pattern in any of Seymour's music. It's just this kind of pure sound thing, or that you have in Debussy, or the later composers. For me personally, that's much harder. I had, but I guess it's a matter of what your ear is used to. You just have to train your ear. I played a piece with a friend last year. He's does kind of crossover between classical and jazz. And sometimes it was, now is this the same chord or is this a different chord? And I really had to learn chords by the keyboard picture. Couldn't do it by the sound.
Well, Daniela?
Stephen Jay Gould has an interesting essay on how intelligence is not totally in the brain. For athletes, it's in the body. For pianists, it's in the hands. I tried very hard to learn piano for a little while, and I just found it, I'm a writer and I've written tons of literature books in every genre, And if you ask me, and I can type 90 words a minute, but if you ask me where the letters are, my hands know, but my brain doesn't.
Yeah,
And I'm wondering if the same thing happens with playing the piano. Your hands know where to go, but your brain doesn't have to
yeah,
say, this is a C, this is an A.
Yeah.
And on top of that, some of the most popular, well-known singers in the world do not read music.
Yeah.
Frank Sinatra didn't, so
Yeah.
many others.
yeah,
It's much more important to have an ear.
Yeah.
And the phenomenon of knowing just how to make those vocal cords, how wide, how to get on pitch, happens instantaneously.
mm-hmm,
It's such a wonder that also for a singer, intelligence can be in the larynx. And immediately you hear and you reproduce
yeah,
the pitch with knowing exactly how wide or narrow your vocal cords should be. It's all so amazing. And I wondered what you, this is all about what Tom was saying about feeling the thing in your body. I mean, it touches on so many things you both said.
thanks,
Yeah,
Daniela.
it's
Let me just repeat for the folks at home.
memory, yeah.
So Daniela was speaking about the connection between the body and the hands and the larynx and musicians who kind of almost like learn there, and was asking the question, does it ever happen where the hands seem to know even when the brain doesn't? And sorry, you're going to respond.
Yeah, that's where you want to go. You know, that's the motor memory. But the thing is, you know, ideally the motor memory is conscious. You know, not as a brain thing, but you still know what you're doing. You know what that chord feels like. You know how much speed it needs. You know, but that's what you mean. That's what you're talking about. And there are people, also pianists, who don't read music, who just have a direct connection between their ear and their hands. And the motor memory is what you basically train in practicing. You know, if there's no motor memory, you know the student hasn't practiced.
You know. I think we have time for one more question. Go ahead, Terry.
Yeah, I was very interested to hear you talk about the person with the baby in the womb hearing music, and that music, that hearing is one of the first things to develop. Because I think I have also heard that when you die, the last thing to go is your hearing. You know, people can, you may not think they're even alive, but they still can hear.
Yeah.
And I think that's interesting.
Terry's just sharing
I think
that some of that she's read that one of the last senses, not only is it the first sense to awaken, as Birgit was saying, but one of the last sentences to go is hearing. One of the last things that happens to you maybe is the last thing you hear. So it's interesting. Maybe it's bookends.
Yeah.
You were going to say?
I thought that Janine had a
Oh,
question.
Janine, did you want to ask or say?
Not a question, but I'm just equating making mistakes in performing, because I do play the piano, to acting, to being on the stage, and how when you rehearse, if you make a mistake, you stop and you get the right line and you say the right line and you continue. But during a performance, you just have to keep going, you know, rather than just making a face and having the whole audience know that somehow or other you goofed. And I think when actors get into the character, whatever character they're playing, it's easier for them to go on and maybe even make a comment or say something ad lib to keep the motion going, you know, than just trying to remember what their next line was. I mean, I've heard actors talk about skipping entire pages of dialogue, you know, making a mistake and then keeping on where the audience is. They might say, well, what did I miss? You know, but they don't really know. And there's a similarity there, you know, between making a mistake and playing and acting.
Yeah, that's true. And Bill, sorry, did you have one? You wanted to close us out?
Yeah, I was just, a number of years ago, I heard two people very knowledgeable about piano playing talk about touch and how pianists are separated in some ways by the way they are able to touch. And I'm just wondering, I have no idea what that means, and I can't tell the difference between one pianist and another by their touch, but apparently it's something that happens.
Well, I mean, there are different schools and traditions of technique, you know, and that would play into this whole culture of touch, you know, what people, like where you initiate the motion, or they do it from your finger or your arm, or, you know, whether somebody plays with high fingers or whether somebody plays with rotation. There are a whole lot of philosophies. I would think, you know, great people always sound great, no matter what, you know, what philosophy they follow. And maybe it's good that there are different things, because people are different, and different things work for different people.
All right, well, thank you so much. Thank you all for being here. Thank you. And thank you all online. Thank you, Janine, Mimi, Sylvia.
Thank